Being able to become proficient at a skill is actually itself a skill that you need to learn. There are many things that everybody has that they are just naturally talented at. But what happens when you are presented with a problem or a challenge and you need to hone in a new skill and learn something that you're not naturally good at in order to accomplish what you want to accomplish? What is the best path forward in order to get that skill learned and become extremely proficient at it as quickly and as efficiently as possible? That's what we're going to talk about today. Ready? Let's dive in. When I was a kid, I played sports, and one of the things that I heard over and over and over from coaches growing up was that practice makes perfect. The idea was, as long as you continue to practice over and over and over again, eventually you are going to get extremely good at something. And that is ground into most kids, whether it's in school, whether it's in sports, whatever it is. The idea is practice makes perfect, so just keep on going and eventually you'll get there. But there's a problem with this. Because what if you are doing it wrong? If you are doing it incorrectly, then the very fact that you are repeating it over and over again incorrectly cements the fact that you will never get perfect at it. So the repetition, the practice actually keeps you from getting to that area of proficiency, that area of perfection. It doesn't help you. And so when you look at the idea or the advice that practice makes perfect, it falls short. It's almost there, but it's not quite there. Now, when confronted with this, the next set of advice that most people will hear is that practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes permanent. Perfect practice makes perfect. And the idea here catches the mistake of practice makes perfect. It's that when you repeat something over and over again, what's happening in your brain is it's moving something from the conscious brain to the unconscious brain. It's creating a pattern and an autopilot repeating set of code that it knows as long as we do this, we'll get the accomplished result that we want. And so it codes that into your subconscious. And that's why you're able to do things every single day on repetition that you never think about. You basically just go into autopilot. Many people find this like on their commute. You've driven that way every single day for how many years? Now you can basically do it on autopilot. You don't really have to think about it. You get home and you realize, man, I don't remember anything about that drive. It's because when habits are produced in your brain, it encodes that set of instructions of do A, then B, then C, then D into your subconscious so that you don't have to expend energy, literal energy, like actual calories, brain burning up to figure out, focus the attention on that. It's going to get that onto autopilot so that it's easier, frees up resources for the other things that your brain thinks that you should focus on more. So if you do something incorrectly over and over and over and over again, what you're doing is you're cementing in the bad habits and the bad practices, and you're making it harder for yourself to get to the ideal. And so the advice then flips and it says perfect practice makes perfect. But we run into another problem with this one, a different problem, because perfect practice, it assumes that you know how to do it perfectly. And the very fact that you're trying to practice to get perfect at it means that you are going to make mistakes. And so you cannot practice perfectly. And so it's almost like, hey, we're still saying we need to point at this perfection, at this ideal, but what do we have to actually do to get there? And this is where we come to the practice that will actually get you from zero proficiency to 100% proficiency, being an expert, being able to do it exactly perfectly the way that it's supposed to be done. And this approach I call improved repetition. So practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice doesn't make perfect. Improved repetition makes perfect. And there's 4 steps in order to go through improved repetition. Number 1, you have to be able to identify the ideal. So let's say you want to learn how to play the piano and you know that the first skill you need to learn is doing the scales. And so you have to hit the 8 notes up, then the 8 notes down. Well, you know then what the ideal is. You know the order of the keys that need to be hit and which finger needs to hit them in which order. And so you've identified the ideal for that specific practice. This is important because if you are trying to hone in a skill where you cannot identify what that ideal looks like, you're never going to be able to get there. Because just like in Alice in Wonderland, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. No matter where you end up, you just say, oh, well, I got there. So you must be able to identify the ideal, be able to specify this is exactly what perfection looks like. So whatever the skill is, whether it's marketing, whether it's public speaking, whether it's math, whether it's programming, whatever it is, you have to be able to specify in detail what the ideal looks like. And if you can't do that, you might be aiming too far ahead, pull that back and identify the ideal of a stage that's on the direction to where you think you want to go. Maybe not all the way there, but at least you can specify what that end result looks like. So you must be able to identify the ideal. That is key in step number 1. Once you've identified the ideal, step number 2 is to make your attempt. And so this is very straightforward. You just try and go do it. And really at the beginning, it's most important that the actual attempt takes place, and it really doesn't matter at all how close you are to that ideal. The most important thing is that you actually make that attempt. An example of this is when I first started working out. So a lot of you know, back in the early days of my channel, I was pretty puffy. I weighed about 230 pounds. And in January of 2021, I decided I was going to get in shape. And so I started dieting. I started the carnivore diet. In 5.5 months, I lost 50 pounds, and I didn't start working out until close to the end of that 5-month time frame. And I knew someday I wanted to be the type of person that would exercise and lift weights and work out and be very athletic very consistently. But it didn't start off that way, and I knew that that's not the way that the brain works. You don't have to jump all the way to the ideal, and if you try, you're probably going to fail. So what I did was I got a set of dumbbells, and every time I went to the bathroom, I grabbed that set of dumbbells and I did some curls with it, or I did some shoulder presses with it, or I did some squats with them. And so this was my first attempt. It didn't matter how many reps I did. It didn't matter what my form was. It didn't matter whether it made me sore. It didn't matter anything other than me just doing it. The first step is action only. That's it. And the reason why this is important is because it's a lot easier to improve on something that you've started. It's impossible to improve on something that you've never started. Second reason why it's important is because it slowly changes your identity. Now you realize I'm the type of person that does X, Y, or Z. When you start to tell yourself this different story about who you are, then that changes the actions. And so when your actions then reinforce what story you're telling yourself about who you are, that's a positive feedback loop. And I start to use the dumbbells more and more and more. The third reason why this specifically in this case was effective is because I paired that new habit with an existing habit. Obviously, I'm always going to go to the bathroom. So putting the dumbbells next to the bathroom door triggers me to remember to start that new habit because I'm automatically going to go to the bathroom. And so now that habit that will never go away is a trigger for the new habit that I want to start. And again, it's just a matter of doing it at first, not a matter of how close I am to the ideal. So number 2 is attempt. It is start it. It is just do something that is an attempt that is on the beginning of that journey towards the ideal. But it is imperative that we don't stop there. And that's where we get to step number 3, which is identifying the errors. And you are able to identify the errors by comparing your attempt against the ideal, because we've already identified what the ideal looks like. So after that first attempt, what you're going to do is you're going to look at your result and you're going to say, how close does this look to that ideal? You have to identify what the errors are. So in the example of playing the piano, this is a really easy one. You accidentally hit the wrong key. Well, you know that the ideal is hitting the right key. And so you know your error was hitting the wrong key. And then you move on to step 4, which is attempt again. And you just error correct one thing. That's it. It is much easier to improve 1% a day than trying to improve 400% a year. And it's going to be a lot more effective that way. The compounding interest on improving 1% a day is going to move you a lot closer to that ideal than if you try and error correct a bunch of things at once and get a lot better all at once by leapfrogging. It's going to be much more efficient, much more practical, and quicker to get to that ideal state. Once you've completed step 3, which is identifying what those errors are, you're going to move on to step 4, which is attempting again eliminating one of the prior errors. And this is key. When you attempt it again, you don't need to correct all of the errors. You're back here, your ideal is far along the road. You attempted it and you recognize there's 100 ways in which I am not meeting up to what that ideal state looks like. And so instead of trying to correct them all at once, which you're going to fail out because it's very difficult to do that, it's going to be mentally discouraging. You're not going to be able to correct them all at once. You're going to try that and then it's going to fail and you're going to be like, this is hopeless. Only focus on one at a time. Look at one error that you made. Just focus on correcting that one error in your next attempt. And then what you're going to do is you're going to flip-flop back and forth between these steps. You're going to attempt it, then you're going to look at your attempt, you're going to identify any errors. Again, you do that by comparing it against the ideal, and then you're going to attempt it again, eliminating one of the errors. And you're going to keep on flipping back and forth, repeating these steps over and over again until you are able to correct one of the errors, then you move on to the next error, then you move on to the next error and the next one. And what's going to happen here is you're going to improve 1% a day. You're going to improve just a tiny bit every single time you repeat this repetition, this practice. And that's the point here. Because if you look at the initial attempt and you realize, okay, I'm a mile away from the ideal state, you try and correct everything at once, you might be able to correct half of them, depending on the skill and depending on how far away you are from the ideal. And you're going to get discouraged and you're not going to move that far forward. But if you hone in and error correct one tiny error at a time through little repetitions, you'll improve 1% a day. Now that compounds on itself. If you improve 1% every single day, it's not like at the end of 365 days, you're only up 365%, because every 1% is building on the last improvement of 1%. If you improve 1% a day, that actually gets you to 3,700% better after repeating that for an entire year. Magic of compounding interest. At the end of the day, I don't know if this will work for you, but I know that it works exceptionally well for me, and it really helps with the motivating factor, with being able to piecemeal new skills and be able to get to where I want to go, understanding that I don't have to get there tomorrow. And as long as I make tiny little iterated improvements, I will get there eventually, and it'll be a lot easier than if I try and do it a different way. So steps again: identify the ideal, make your first attempt, identify the error, which is comparing it versus the ideal, and then error correct one of those with a reattempt, and you repeat that process over and over and over again until you arrive at that ideal. And this process I call improved repetition. As always, I really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.